Good afternoon, Houston. Welcome in. We're roughly 2 weeks from pitchers and catchers reporting, and we already have Joe Kelly beef, or is it chicken? We'll let you decide on episode 8 of Stone Cold Stros. It starts right now.
The Houston Astros, world champions!
Welcome into Stone Cold Stros. I'm Brandon Strange. I'm joined by SportsMap.com's editor, Josh Jordan. You can follow him on Twitter at JoshJordan975 and SportsMap Houston senior content contributor, Charlie Palillo. You can follow him at Palillo and read him weekly on SportsMap.com. Charlie, Josh, welcome in.
Welcome. You mentioned roughly 2 weeks to pitchers and catchers, starting to stretch it out in Florida, in the Astros case in Florida. 2 months to the day. The Astros and the White Sox in the season opener at Minute Maid Park, and I guess we'll touch upon a potential early subplot.
We definitely will. For our live audience that's making their way in right now, appreciate your patience as we got the show started up. If you're catching us for the first time, we do this live at 3 p.m.-ish on YouTube every Monday, and then the audio version goes up Monday evenings. So if you prefer listening, we are on all the major audio platforms. So please give us a sub on any of those platforms. And while you're there, give us a 5-star rating if you feel so inclined. We appreciate it. Be sure to follow our parent channel, SportsMap Houston, on all your favorite social platforms as well, like Facebook, not Facebook. What's a Facebook? Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, and of course, right here on YouTube. So we do appreciate your engagement. Make sure you're commenting. We're going to feature some of those comments as we go along. And we teased it in the open. Let's get right to it. Protagonist of his very own new book, pitcher Joe Kelly, says that had the Astros advanced to the World Series in 2020, he was so totally ready to confront them at the team hotel. He spoke with AM 570 in LA about this. And this really reads like a bad Kenny Powers fan fiction. But he says, 100% I would have. My wife knows that. She could vouch for me. We had twins at the time, and she said, okay, you can do what you want. Man, I can't even read these quotes without doing a bad Kenny Powers impression. So, guys, what are your thoughts on this? I mean, we could go any number of ways on this, but this sounds really weak sauce.
Well, my thoughts are a little bit hazy at the moment. Wait, that's just my computer lag. As you mentioned, he's hawking a book. So you want to put juicy, salacious, sellable, book me on talk show type elements to it. What better role model for young twins than daddy saying he wanted to go start a Pier 6 brawl at the team hotel? Even if the picture was perfectly clear, I'm not sure you guys could make this out. Can you see that? And if you're going with just audio, play along, theater of the imagination. That's the thread that Joe Kelly's career is dangling by, off a season in which he threw 37 innings to a 6.08 earned run average. So tall tales or short tales of what he would have or would not have done in 2020 are worth about as much as what comes out of his right arm right now. Very, very little.
Yeah, I agree. Is this guy just going to go away ever? I'm so tired of hearing about this. And we always get these, just crazy things from these books when they're teasing him. For Joe Buck, it was all about his hair plugs. For Joe Kelly, it's about punching Astros in the face in the lobby of a hotel. If they were to meet in the World Series in 2020, which didn't happen, I think that all that would have happened is Carlos Correa would have punched him in the face, and that would have been about the end of that. So, I mean, he's one of the most hated guys by the fan base, and who doesn't get extra run bringing up the Astros and going back to the scandal over and over and over again? It works for every reporter, especially the national guys. Why wouldn't it work for Joe Kelly? He'll probably sell a lot of books to Dodger fan, maybe even Yankee fan out of this. So business-wise, maybe not the dumbest idea.
Not coincidentally, Joe Kelly referred to Dodger fans as the best fan base in the world, or all humankind, or something along those lines. Look, if he wants to continue to pump up the pseudo tough guy persona, if he makes the White Sox this season, well, he'll be at Minute Maid Park. And I know the Astros is not the NFL where the team convenes at a hotel and stays there the night before a game, but the Astros won't be hard to find, Joe. course, how many of them are left going all the way back to 2017 or even 2020? So this too shall pass. Much ado about nothing. Pick your bromide. It applies where Joe Kelly is concerned. A good thing, though, that he didn't take a shot to the face from Correa, because Carlos might have broken a knuckle.
Touche.
Well, they weren't too hard to find now. They weren't too hard to find then. He's a millionaire with the means to go chase them down anywhere if should he feel so inclined about it. I don't know why he's letting the fact that the Astros didn't make the World Series deter him from doing something that he's clearly so motivated about. And had they only just made the World Series, and everyone would have had to hold Joe Kelly back, and everyone knew it. He says even MLB knew it, because they went to his wife behind his back and told her to try to dissuade him from doing that. And she said, not even I can control him. So I'm paraphrasing there a little bit, but it's that is the gist of it that he tells 570 in LA. So that is, I mean, you really can't make this stuff up. It got us thinking. We were talking about this in the pre-show, but kind of, he's on that Mount Rushmore, I guess, of Astros villains, antagonists, whatever you would want to call them. Maybe villain assigns him a little bit too much credit. But who are some of our favorite Astros antagonists? Because they've got to be on, it's got to be numbering, in the dozens at this point, right?
Well, I guess how you want to attack it, right? Joe Kelly made it personal. It became personal and all that stuff. So there's we hate that guy, but really it's because we're envious. Albert Pujols booed for 15 years, but there was no reason to have personal animus toward Albert Pujols other than he hit a home run falling out of bed every time he showed up at Minute Maid Park. Jim Edmonds on many of those Cardinals teams similarly. So where it was a visceral, I'd like to punch that guy in the face sentiment from Astros fans, no one tops Joe Kelly, at least of recent vintage for me. Tommy Lasorda, if we go back a couple of generations of Astros fans, I think Tommy Two-Face was despised. But even then, he was just kind of the blowhard manager of the Dodgers, who were usually better than the Astros and all that. Whereas Joe Kelly, I get the sense, and maybe it's just an angrier world now, social media and all that. But either you guys have someone you're thinking, oh, if we could put a guy in a dunk tank and have him wear cement shoes while he's in there, Joe Kelly's number one. Anyone top him?
How about Mike Fiers? Could I throw him out there?
Yeah.
We have a winner.
Yeah. You win.
And maybe honorable mention, John Boy. He's the reason that video got cut with Altuve crossing home plate, not wanting his jersey ripped off to cut. He's running directly to the dugout when it was really like 2 minutes of him running around celebrating with his teammates. And then that's what launched all the buzzer garbage that we still hear about. So I'll go with Mike Fiers and John Boy. John Boy's come around a little bit because he just can't deny the Astros winning. But Fiers and John Boy are up there for me.
I'm not going to be able to beat that. I mean, because obviously Fiers is the ultimate heel when it comes to the Astros existence. I'm going to name a couple of guys you didn't name, which was Trevor Bauer and Ryan Tepera, a couple of pitchers who've had some interesting things to say. And granted, these guys are just honorable mention. I can't top Fiers, but I do find it interesting. And look, you're going to make a lot of enemies when you do a lot of winning. The Astros have done a lot of winning. And so I'll agree with you, Charlie, when Pujols came up to bat, it wasn't more of a groan of hate. It was a groan of loathing. Just, oh man, are they really going to pitch to this guy again? And they did, and the ball would quickly leave the ballpark. So yeah, I'll go with Trevor Bauer and Tepera, but I can't beat Fiers. It's good being the Astros when you do this much winning. Look, I'd say guys like Keith Law and Dan Clark had who were Twitter personalities were creeping up in there. When you are a winning organization like this, I'd say that the Astros lists of children are becoming Nick Cannon-esque, and I was told I could say that. So, and part of that winning is because the Astros have some great decision makers. The great decision makers have made another seemingly great decision, and we haven't spoken about this on this podcast yet. We will do that now. Welcome to H-Town, Dana Brown. Indeed, the Astros announced Dana Brown as their new acting GM for the future. And really excited about this. We've talked about Dana on this show just because when we were talking about candidates, how excited we were for a guy who's been a proven, scout at the Nationals, and now he works for the Astros after helping build a massive roster for the Braves. Charlie, give us your thoughts. Like, what are you really feeling about Dana Brown being announced as the Astros GM, the future of the front office?
Well, going back to when the purported short list was initially named, Dana Brown was obviously the best fit for the Astros, the most credentialed for the job needs at this point in the franchise's existence in terms of wheeling and dealing and trading. Of course, there are moves around the margins, and you never know how the season unfolds. And in July, maybe Dana Brown will have some very heavy lifting to do. But as you look for the next generation of Astros talent, bridging from the Bregman, Altuve remaining core guys, Yordan, young guy, Kyle Tucker, young guy, Jeremy Pena, young guy, number of pitchers young and under control. But still, nothing lasts forever. The Astros are not going to run roughshod over the American League West forever unless their farm system gets back to producing more talent. It's not a problem. It's not a failure of the farm system. Everything that they've generated the last 6-8 years has largely resulted in the dynasty they're in the midst of now. You're picking low every round, every year, the loss of 2 first and second round picks over 2 years from the cheating penalty. So it's not as if they've withered on the vine, but their minor league system's not good now. It's clearly in the bottom third among the major league teams. The consensus and prospect rankings are rankings of prospects. Many of them aren't going to amount to anything. The most hyped Astros prospect in the last 5 years is Forrest Whitley, who's a big fat zero at this point. Right? He was in the top 50, the top 20 of some of these lists 2, 3, 4 years ago, and it hadn't worked out at all. But that Hunter Brown is the only Astros prospect at this point defined as someone who'd be eligible to win Rookie of the Year in the major leagues in 2023. He's the only prospect in the top 100 across the 30 major league organizations. There is work to do, and Dana Brown has done spectacular work. It's not like he was responsible for every pick and selection the Braves have made in recent years, but that has been a minor league talent pipeline for several years. Homegrown talent, development of pitchers, as well as everyday players. The win horse and the place horse for National League Rookie of the Year just last season. And you can predate that to time in Toronto under Alex Anthopoulos, who then followed to Atlanta. You want to go back earlier than that, not as important a role, but the Expos, then Nationals. It's just a tremendous resume. If you were going to hire someone who hadn't done it yet as a general manager, I think it was last week, mentioned the old saw, how do you get experience? So someone gives you the experience. As a general manager, it's a slam dunk hire. Now, could Dana Brown flop for whatever reason? Sure. I don't think it's a smart bet that he will. But the one other guy I wanted to mention specifically, Brad Ausmus, whether the actual runner-up or just floated as the runner-up, maybe Brad Ausmus would have killed it. But if Brad Ausmus had gotten the job, it would have been in large part because he was teammate besties of Jeff Bagwell. And as I noted in a column the other day, many, many hires, many walks of life to get started, well, it's often who you know and not what you know. And Brad Ausmus, forget Dartmouth educated, baseball educated, brilliant thinking man's catcher for years and years and years, but a very thin resume to qualify him to become the general manager of a major league team. So here to the hire of Dana Brown, who raises the tally of current major league general managers who are African-American to 1. Ken Williams is executive vice president overseeing all baseball operations with the Chicago White Sox. So while certainly it wasn't a driving force and should not have been a driving factor in Jim Crane making the individual decision for the Astros, this is a great hire for Major League Baseball also.
No, I agree. And we had a lot of conversations about David Stearns, that the Astros could wait a year till his contract was up with the Brewers. And, maybe they just let Bagwell kind of run things. Apparently that's not the case. Crane said he hadn't even reached out about Stearns at the Houston Sports Awards the other night. So Dana Brown looked like the guy outside of Ausmus. And Ausmus was kind of late to the party as far as us as media members finding out that he was even an option. So that one was pretty interesting. But, Charlie talked about the experience. That's what we wanted to see from Dana Brown. He was my top candidate. That's who I wanted for the job, all the scouting, all that stuff. I thought it was interesting when they talked to him. They said, who did you speak with when you were interviewing with the job, talking to people? And he said he talked to Bagwell and Reggie Jackson, that he didn't speak to any of the front office people, none of the assistant GMs, nobody else really, and obviously Crane, who he interviewed with. So I thought that was interesting, that we're not going to have you talk to anybody else. You're just going to talk to Bagwell, Reggie Jackson, and Jim Crane. I wonder if that becomes like the buffer where Dana Brown is meeting with Bagwell and talking with Reggie Jackson, and then Crane is the ultimate end and be all as far as how decisions get made, especially on big contracts. I'm sure Dana will handle the everyday stuff just fine. But I found that curious, that seems to be the brain trust, the pecking order. Those are the guys that Jim Crane trusts. And then obviously he knew from his experience with Bagwell, or not Bagwell, but Biggio with Dana Brown. He had talked to Craig about his experiences with him, and Craig was a big fan. So there you go. That's who Crane listens to. Not like we didn't know, but nice to have a little more confirmation.
I found some of his comments interesting too. I think what's interesting is this guy is walking into a situation in which the team's built. So there's not an expectation that he needs to take the team to the next level. He's not looking to take a step with this organization. He's looking to keep this window open. And that's what he talked about. He's long-term sustained winning was the 4 words that he used as his goal for this team. And, you talked about the interview process, Josh. I took from that as well that how involved Crane was, because he said this was the first time that he's ever gotten to speak to an owner in any of these processes. He had been a GM candidate for the Mets in the past as well. And he said this is the first time he's ever been in front of an owner. And so I don't know whether he meant just in general or if he meant during an interview process, but either way, I found that kind of interesting. That stuck out to me was that maybe owners don't take as much of a hands-on process as Jim Crane does here in Houston. And I think he felt that was very meaningful in the interview process, that he was actually getting in front of the decision maker. So I found that pretty interesting. And it kind of goes to your point, which is you're not going to make a big deal in this team without Jim Crane signing off on it, not the least of which we're all anticipating, which is a possible extension of Kyle Tucker.
Well, I know if I owned a multi-billion-dollar enterprise, I'd be involved in every major decision, or at least make sure my voice was heard or information had gotten to my ear before it was executed, whether it's a $200 million contract extension or a mega trade. And where the Astros are just in terms of their hierarchy, Jeff Bagwell obviously is Crane's ear. The Reggie Jackson relationship is kind of curious. It started out with a charity endeavor. I mean, really, you think Reggie Jackson could name one Astros minor leaguer? But
Hunter Brown,
if they get audiences and so forth, but the Astros don't have a president of baseball operations.
Right.
So if Jeff Luhnow had still been here and moved up from general manager, and he actually had the title of executive vice president, but he was going to hire someone to run the day-to-day, then maybe Jim Crane would not have been integrally involved. If I were Jim Crane, I would still want to be involved in a hire of this level on the managerial flow chart. But Jim Crane's functioning as the president of baseball operations as well as the managing partner. So it was much more directly his hire to make, because between him and the general manager, there is nobody.
No, that's fair. I'm curious to see, as we pointed out earlier, we're so close to pitchers and catchers already getting started. Not a lot of time for Dana Brown to do a whole lot between now and the start of camp and the season. And Chandler Rome pointed out in his column with the Chronicle that's how it kind of worked with Click. He didn't really make a lot of moves until after he'd completed a season with the team. It was going into that second year where he started adding some scouts and stuff like that. Some of the assistant GMs, some of those positions he filled. So I wonder if that'll be the same for Dana if he waits a while to get a lay of the land before he starts hiring people.
Well, it's nice to be handed the Mona Lisa that you don't need to be thinking, where's the paintbrush so I can start making changes. Right? The Astros, in terms of their general quality going into 2023, they're on autopilot. Right? They're going to be very good no matter what Dana Brown does this spring. So he'll assess organizational depth and start planning for the draft this summer. And in terms of the major league roster, come June, July, if there's a move to be made, injuries, decline in performance, whatever, But Dana Brown at the major league level, maybe they have one bench position still to finish pending Michael Brantley's status. So that's probably the only major league personnel call that Dana Brown's going to be charged with making before opening day.
But I will say this is that, you talk about he won't be expected to make major changes on the Mona Lisa, but you're getting the Mona Lisa, and the bar has been set of, winning a championship. And then if you don't the next year, then what's the one thing that changed? Well, the GM did. So it's like you unintentionally walk into this buzzsaw. Michael Schwab had an interesting quote, and you guys should follow him on Twitter. You probably do. If you're watching an Astros podcast in January, you probably find or follow Michael Schwab. But he said a quote from someone in another front office says about the Dana Brown hires that their championship window just extended for another 5 to 7 years longer. That's saying a lot, though. I mean, they've been perennial playoff team for 6 years straight now. Is that what we're talking about? Is extending another 5 years? Because that would be, you're talking about a Braves type of window at that point, right?
90s Braves into the 2000s, 14 consecutive division titles when you take out the strike season of 94. Look, the Astros, forget the dynastic run they're still in the midst of. This is a more have franchise than have not in terms of resources and market size, and all of that now has been compounded to the good with this run, right? Their sponsorships are up in value. Their broadcast rights aren't up anytime soon, but everything about the Astros is more valuable than it was, which gives them more resources to retool, including, if your farm system's not cranking out Correa and Bregman and Tucker and Jordan in the next 3-4 years. I'm not saying you go spend $280 million on your major league payroll, but as long as ownership is good with it, you can be very aggressive. We don't know if it's going to work out now for the Texas Rangers, but look at all the spending that they have done the last 2 off seasons. They also now have one of the top half dozen farm systems in Major League Baseball. Now, they have 5 or 6 of the top 100 relative to the Astros 1. The Rangers ran the American League West in the late 90s. Had their little spurt with back-to-back World Series. Oh, never won one. Came so close, but never won one. There's going to be a time where the Rangers do get good again. Maybe it's as soon as this year if DeGrom stays healthy and their other pitching acquisitions work out. Right? The Seattle Mariners are on the come. The Angels have question marks galore in terms of health and durability, but they have actually an interesting lineup if their pitching is halfway decent for a change. And Oakland right now is a complete joke. Now, the Astros are the king of the mountain, so everyone's going to be coming for them. And no dynasty lasts forever. All kings get toppled or die off at some point. But there's no reason to think the Astros are going to tumble in the next 2-3 years. So that's half of Dana Brown's window covered for him. Can the Astros get back to pumping out premium grade again talent? So when we're in 2026, 2027, 2028, and Altuve's 37, 38 years old, and Bregman's moved on or is 34, 35 years old, you still have Jordan. You hope to have Tucker. You'll still have Jeremy Pena. You can control him for another 5 years. But Dana Brown takes over where, the idea that all he can do is screw it up is silly, but there'll always be the lunatic fringe that views it that way if they don't at least get back to the World Series.
Yeah, the draft is what excites me about Dana Brown, because we know Crane, if they're big contracts, that stuff's going to go through him. I'm sure Brown will give his input, but we know how Jim rolls in that aspect. But we thought it was possible they may not have a GM this year. So having Dana Brown to be the captain of that draft coming up, a full complement of picks, not wasting a year, that certainly could be a big deal. Plus, the Astros, if they stay good like they have been, they're picking at the end of the round, every round. And to have a guy like Dana Brown that's good at finding guys, 3rd, 4th, 5th round, you're going to need somebody that's not just good at, oh, I'll take Bregman at number 2 overall, or I'll take Correa first. They're going to need somebody that can find some guys that aren't on everybody's radar.
Absolutely true. And when you especially look at stats like over the 7 of the past 8 years, the Astros have had representation in the Rookie of the Year candidacy, and 2 of those times won. So when you look at it, especially when you're talking about a team that has a mix of veterans and rookies, and when you're talking about how sustainable they are going forward, you need cheap help, and for them to be able to cultivate that, this is the guy you're talking about, Dana Brown, who can do that for you. One of the decisions he's going to make on the roster, which I think is interesting, is this time last week we were talking about Yuli Gurriel and him possibly signing with the Marlins. It looked imminent, and then it looks like that's fallen apart. We were hearing that Astros could still be in the mix with that. I think John Heyman says that the Twins checked in on Yuli. We also saw Chandler Rome say that sources familiar with Dusty's decision-making, I guess, said that Dusty was an advocate for possibly a Chad Pinder as an option who takes some of these utility reps. We've also heard internally that there's some desire to get a guy like David Hensley those utility reps. The longer this stretches out with Yuli, though, does it become more likely that he returns or less likely that he returns to the team?
How about it, Josh?
I think more likely. I don't think it's going to happen, to be clear. But if the number gets to be such a small number, and that's what we're hearing is that the Twins were looking at a pretty low ball offer to him, as were the Marlins. If it gets to be to where Yuli's not asking for, $6-7 million, it's a small deal, and it's only for 1 year. Maybe they decide to do it. And I'm looking here over, at Pinder who you're talking about. In Rome's column, they talk about somebody that can take a lot of reps at second base and shortstop. He hasn't done a bunch of that. Hardly any of it lately in the last several seasons. Most of the time when he's getting in the lineup, it's in the outfield, which I get it. If Michael Brantley's not ready, they might have a use for that in left field. But if that's the case, it's not like he's, you could play him at shortstop all the time, or you can't do that with Yuli. It's not like that. He would likely, maybe play some corner infield, maybe some second base and some left field. I think Yuli could play some second. Obviously, we know he can play first, and in a pinch, he could play some left field. So with Pinder, it's looking like a pretty small deal for him. And they upgraded. They went ahead and got Aledmys Diaz, and now Pinder's a free agent. So we got a good look at Aledmys Diaz. We know what he brings to the table. So I don't see a point in making a move like this for Chad Pinder. If you're not going to roll with Yuli, I'm fine going with some of the guys that are on the roster. Some guys that still have options, you can move them around, back to the minors, back up. I think that's the route they'll end up going.
Let's channel a little Ty Webb. Chad Pinder, you're not good. Just because you play a bunch of positions doesn't mean you're necessarily good at any of them. It's like a really, really light-hitting shortstop. Oh, he must have a great glove. No, maybe he's just not very talented. Chad Pinder last had a 300 on-base percentage, I think, in 2018. Master of not all trades, no trades. Jack of several, master of none. I mean, he's 30. He'd probably give you a little more positional flexibility than Yuli because he has played infield, outfield. But they have Mauricio Dubon to do that. Pinder, I don't know what the Dusty hook on that is. Jerkson Profar is probably the best remaining free agent that if you wanted something, he's a switch hitter, can play infield, outfield. Hasn't played shortstop now in years. I wouldn't be counting on that, but was once the number one prospect in all the minor leagues, which tells you about prospects. But coming off a solid season with San Diego, again, a switch hitter. If you're looking to take some of the at-bats against left-handed pitching, against right-handed pitching with Chad McCormick covering it for sure against lefties and against some righties. So Pinder doesn't excite me at all. I would be wary with Yuli, who understandably wants to go somewhere where we can get regular playing time. Well, then the Astros should be off his list. I mean, everyday playing time. The Marlins, other than the Cuban connection, South Beach, I'm not sure what the appeal would be there. And now that the Twins have been mentioned, connect a couple of dots. The Marlins Twins trade last week, sending the good starter Pablo Lopez to the Twins. Minnesota traded the batting champ, Luis Arraez, who split his time between second base and first base. So he's going to the Marlins. So there are some at-bats to be had probably at first base right now for the Twins. But the reality is there's very little Yuli market. Right? He's coming off an awful season. He turns 39 years old in May or June. I never remember which one of those spring months. So it's a little bit beggars can't be choosers. So if you'd rather have Yuli at $3 million, I don't want Yuli instead of David Hensley. David Hensley plays for basically the minimum. He can play shortstop. That's not in play for Yuli if something happens to Jeremy Pena. But if Brantley's not ready, you still have one spot, right? You have your starting 8, quote unquote, everyday players. If Brantley's not ready to DH, you have your backup catcher, Diaz or Lee. You have Dubon. Do you have Jake Myers? And then you have one more, so Hensley, and then one more spot available. Presuming you're going to carry 13 pitchers, 13 position players, quote unquote, on the roster. So if Brantley's not going to be ready, you do have that one roster spot to play with. And let's not just hand one to Jake Myers. So I get the sentimentality of Yuli, but there are probably a couple of better fits on the roster. But this is an Astros problem, right? The last guy on the roster. Who's it going to be? It's not, oh no, look at the hole on their roster. Pinder or Profar or Gurriel. It could be one of us, and they're going to be just fine.
I hope it's one of us. I definitely
me.
use that paycheck. I'm not sure what it means. The length of this, the longer it goes, but I think for organizational depth, I'd be happy to see Yuli come back. I guess the more it goes on with me personally, the more Yuli's in the rearview mirror, and I guess I'm more comfortable with him being gone. I'm probably also conditioned by Jim Crane with all the attrition to the faces of this core. Leaving year after year, I'm a little bit more conditioned to let guys go and maybe look at the bright side, which is Yuli went out on top.
And they've lost great players coming off great years. Yuli, other than Verlander, is older than all of them and coming off a crappy year. So other than La Pena, popular player, and here for all 6 years of this dynasty run, I mean, they moved on without a hiccup. From Springer and Cole and Correa and prospectively Verlander, moving on from soon-to-be 39-year-old Yuli Gurriel coming off a negative WAR season. This is not a crisis.
No, stats-wise, it's kind of interesting. Yuli's kind of had a good batting average year, not so good. Next year, good again, then not so good. He's kind of every other year kind of guy, winning the batting title and then having this really poor year as far as batting average this year. So if you were trying to look at the bright side, maybe this is the year where he's good again. But, you can't get caught up in those types of patterns. Eventually, they end, or they're just really something to point to. They're not really something that you can count on.
If they would show a little willingness to play Kyle Tucker some in center field for the Yuli camp, that might open it up a little bit, that once Brantley is right, if they're okay with Brantley playing a little right field, right? The bum shoulder's the non-throwing shoulder. So if you have Jordan in left, Tucker in center, Brantley in right, Yuli over the course of his career has not been a big splits guy, meaning it's not like he's destroyed left-handed pitching and merely been pretty good against right-handed pitching. In fact, at times he's had reverse splits. In 2022, where he largely fell off a cliff, he was meaningfully better against lefties. So if you're thinking against certain left-handed pitching, you want to get him at bats as opposed to Brantley because you can reconfigure your outfield a little bit. But hey, if it's Yuli or Chad Pinder, then I'm okay with deferring to the people's choice and bringing back Yuli on the cheap. I would be a little worried about a 39-year-old guy being relegated to part-time duty to how well he'd take to that, along with what does he have left.
I'm going to throw an audible here because I like this conversation. I'm going to make the bottom line question of the week. I want to ask you guys what your favorite Yuli moment is from his time in the Astros. I don't want this to be necessarily, an obituary for Yuli as an Astro, but if he is gone, this is a good opportunity to kind of look in retrospect for some, winning 2 chips here. What's your favorite Yuli moment?
He's not a guy, I don't think, unless there's a glaring one jumping out. Did he hit one of the tying home runs off Kershaw?
Yes.
That's what I was thinking of.
Yeah. So that's number one for me. I'll tell you another memorable moment, he made a very rare error. And McCullers, live wire, emotional guy, kind of showed him up. Geez, my defense. What do you do? And Altuve called out McCullers, hey. It's not like he made a mental error. That's not how we handle business. And obviously there were no ill feelings that lasted from it. Just from one that sticks out in my mind, that is one. But the homer off Kershaw in game 5, that's the biggest individual hitting moment that comes to mind.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at too, Brandon. The shot in the Crawford box is off of Kershaw, but I mean, you could also just kind of put it all in his incredible performance this whole postseason. He was fantastic in the postseason. So I'll put his playoff run in 2022.
Yeah, I'd say the same thing. That was what when I think of iconic Yuli moments, I think of the Kershaw home run, the game time home run, because it had come in that series where he had received a lot of heat for some racially insensitive acts that he took in the dugout regarding Yu Darvish. And so there was a lot of negative press surrounding him. A person with lesser mental fortitude could have let that bother them and crack them in that moment. But he was able to rise to the occasion and come out, and you could see it almost felt like a sense of relief, a weight lifted off his shoulder when he hit that home run, just to know that the chatter that had happened started in the press, making them the bad guys in this series. He, I think, felt the weight of that. Like, okay, this, I'm holding up my end of it. I'm not an anchor bringing down my team with controversy in a big moment. So yeah, I believe, and I saw a little bit of that swagger return to him in the playoff run subsequently last year. And it was just nice to see. And again, like, if he doesn't come back, then it's not the worst thing in the world to go out on top.
Not at all. And just one other team, not linked to him at all. And the Diamondbacks have Christian Walker, a real home run hitting bomber at first base. But it would be a pretty cool family story if Yuli got to finish playing alongside his kid brother. Lourdes dealt from Toronto to Arizona in the Dalton Varsho trade, but that does not look to be in the offing.
No, it's funny you bring that up. Remember when they signed Yuli originally, a lot of people thought they were doing it to get his brother, and that was obviously not the case at all. Yuli turned out to be a terrific signing, helped you win 2 championships. And
we talk about that legacy of Astros players finishing in the top 5 for Rookie of the Year voting. He was a different type of rookie, but in 2017, Gurriel finished 4th in voting for Rookie of the Year. So again, different type of rookie, but he's been one of the faces of this run, which again, we're so familiar with the atrophy of those faces that it's losing me a little bit of his punch each time. But Yuli Gurriel, certainly a centerpiece or a tent pole for this organization.
And a significant moment when they signed him, right? They made the wild card in 2015, then would take a slight step back, 84 and 78, missed the playoffs. The last time they missed the playoffs, 2016. But when it came down, maybe June somewhere, 5 years, $47.5 million for Yuli Gurriel. The Astros? Whoa. That at that time, it's not like it was one of the bigger contracts in baseball, but that was stepping out money. And running up the flagpole with clarity that, okay, the Astros are serious now, adding a veteran player, outbidding the market for him at 33 years of age, joined the big league club a couple of months later, and it was a struggle. But I was just getting his feet wet, acclimatizing to a new country, much less a new ball club and all that. And then the 6 full seasons, 5 seasons plus the COVID season of 2020 that followed.
Well, guys, we have reached, I think, the end of the show. I want to thank everybody for joining. I had one thing I wanted to share. It's not really on the rundown, but I thought it was funny. It's been kind of talked about a little bit, but over the weekend, Justin Verlander receives his Cy Young Award, and they, I think, misspelled valuable as valuable there. And so just personally, I can understand how that happens. This is a promo piece of, and I've covered up the logo, so the we're protected here, but this is a piece of promo that was clearly it missed the QC a couple of times and got printed. One team Visor for those that are listening on the audio version of the podcast. So, hey, I can relate. Sometimes things slip through the cracks.
How many levels of check happen for an award that's given out every year? They don't have a template, the mold to do the font of valuable. You think Verlander's not really much of a trash talker, that they were trying to give him most valuable player? Now that might be Joe Kelly.
Right. Well,
definitely Joe Kelly. And I can tell you, somebody that edits people's stories for a living, a lot of the younger generation, not a fan of the spell check, guys. So this does not surprise me very much, because they keep me on my toes. That's for sure.
You're saying Grammarly is your friend, right?
Yes.
And I guess in this instance, they found out that there is nothing more valuable than a proofreader as it goes.
And that's the bottom line, because Stone Cold said so.
I'm sorry, I couldn't resist. So, hey, everybody that's watching us and interacted with the show, thank you so much. Charlie and Josh, thanks for doing the show with me this week. Make sure you hit like on this video before you go and leave us some comments. Let us know what you think of the show. Let us know what you want to hear us talking about in future episodes. We got a couple weeks before we get started with pitchers and catchers, where the real news gets started. So we'd love some of your input. And please, like I said, sub at any of your, wherever you're viewing or listening to us, make sure you're subscribed to us. And we do appreciate the engagement. For Charlie, Josh, I'm Brandon. Thank you so much. Go Stros.